Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
The Gift That Keeps On Giving is a 5-part series on the life and work of poet and scholar of Indian literature and linguistics, A.K. Ramanujan. Episode 5, The Folklorist and His Legend.
You know, Girish used to always say that Ramanujan was his Akshaya Patra, the gift that kept on giving. It was a very, very hard obituary to write.
I think he was 64.
But he was such an enormous influence.
No, he had a lot of things unfinished. He just thought he would go and come back. But then,
I didn't even understand.
such a shock to all of us.
So much was left incomplete.
He died just that way.
There was a medical mistake.
My first experience in India intersected with his last experience in India.
I'm very sure that he knew he had a lot to give, or a lot that he still wanted to say. And now 30 years later, I can say, my God. Wendy used to call it the jewel in the crown of South Asian studies. Raman's death was untimely.
We went for a walk to Lal Bagh one day, spent one afternoon, and Ramanujan was giving some sort of a folk stories. He was telling us folk stories, and it was very interesting. And one of the folk stories inspired me, woman, she and the tree. I called it She and the Tree in my paintings. And it's so interesting. It was so, nowhere there was any demand as such between us. It's a question of just being friends. I met him last there in my studio. He was complaining about his pain. He was writing poem on his pain. He wrote poem, which was read later on by some people. One of my friends from Chennai called S. Krishnan, who used to be a good friend of Ramanujan. He used to complain about some pain in the leg. And I used to tell him that, why don't you go to Kerala and do some Ayurvedic treatment. He didn't do it, but then he went back to Chicago and there he died. Girish Karnad was in New York. They were supposed to do a play there, Karnad's play. And this news came and Ramanujan was supposed to go and join Girish. He died before the surgery. He just collapsed after he was given the anesthesia. He died just that way.
Yeah, I remember when he died, I wrote an obituary for him in the Illustrated Weekly of India, long dead magazine, which is really sad because I don't have a copy of that anywhere. But it was a very, very hard obituary to write because I can't say I was close to him. I don't think anybody was, except maybe Wendy and a couple of other people. But he was such an enormous influence. And I think when he died, I was like 34 or 35 or something. I didn't even understand how huge he was as an influence. And now 30 years later, I can say, my God. Yeah. He gave each of us this enormous landscape. Yeah.
I think he was 64, or maybe even less, 64. So he was born in 29, so maybe he was 64, 65. It's such an unfortunate thing. You know. There was a cyst in his back, so he went for a routine thing, and they said it's a normal procedure. There's nothing to be concerned. So he went alone to get it removed. There's a complete, because he had no other problem, and this he could have probably ignored, and it was what was a very, very small procedure turned out to be so fatal. I hear that is what happened. And then he had a heart attack as a consequence of this, or separately, none of us know. It came as a shock because it is, it's like it was a normal day for him. It was almost like that, he had a lot of things unfinished. He just thought he would go and come back. But then such a shock to all of us here.
Raman's death was untimely and really unnecessary. He died of inappropriate anesthesia, something like that. There was a medical mistake.
In one of my stories, it is called Namma Padige Now. He liked that story, and he was he liked the title. He said, this is a very interesting title, and he wanted to translate it. He said, I will translate it someday. And that was, I think that was my last meeting with him. That was sometime in 92.
It was a few months before he died. He'd come on his usual trip to India, and he asked Sanjay and I to come to Koshi's and meet him for lunch. And of course, there were other people there. Oh my God, yes, I remember one of the people who was there. Do you remember, or have you heard about it all, this guy called Akumal Ramchandar, who had discovered this painter and all like that? He was there, and he occupied a lot of space. So it was kind of sad. I mean, but who knew that was the last time we were meeting Raman? It's okay, yeah, some other guy is talking, let him talk. Didn't matter. And the obituary in Illustrated Weekly, it was called The Little Man in the Grey Suit.
Cholamandal Artist Village was the place where in December of 1992, he had done his last poetry reading. And I was living in Cholamandal Artist Village. So it was only after a few months. We settled there in 93, because when I arrived in India in November, December, I was just traveling. When we settled it in Cholamandal, me and Monica, there was this painter, S.G. Vasudev, who's from Bangalore. He was our neighbor. We were staying at a studio of a painter just, across the street. He told me, oh, you're working on Ramanujan as a poet? Yeah, yes. How is that? He said, I just like his poetry. I just think he's magic. Well, I'm doing all these sketches and I'm drawing about his poems. I'm drawing his poems. I'm interpreting his poems in paintings. And he showed me his work.
He wrote me a letter. I don't remember him coming to Cholamandal and living there. It was, I think, soon after I left or whatever it is, I don't know. But anyway, he said, I like one of the drawings there, self-portrait. Can I use that self-portrait in my Oxford publication? I gave permission to him and I sent him the drawing. It was used inside, not on the back or front. He apologized to me. He said, Vasudev, I wanted it to be either the front or the back cover. So OUP used it inside. I said, it doesn't matter. Wherever it is used, it is seen. So, but I came for his talk here. He wrote me a letter saying that, I'm going to give, and Krishna also. I had met Krishna after a long time. So, both of them. And I came here for their talk. It was very interesting. And we spent an evening with them. So, if this can happen, I didn't know this writer at all.
And then he says to me casually, look, I have this tape. This is a recording me and Vishwanathan, Velu Vishwanathan, the painter who also has a house in Cholamandal. Paris Vishwanathan, they call him. He's originally from Kerala. We did this recording of his readings of Tirumangai Alvar, which is, the Alvars are the medieval mystics of Tamil mystics. This was from a temple, which was on the Mahabalipuram road. So he read these poems. They had not been published yet. And so I could hear his voice and I could, get a sense of how he read poetry.
A moment stretches longer than an eon, she says. The bright sun is dead, she says. Friend, the ocean too is crying. The undrilled bird will not sleep. The southern breeze burns worse than fire. Oh, how terrible, she says. She looks as if she would pluck from their roots her two breasts. What shall I do? Tell me, she says. What did you mean to do, Lord and Master of Vidavendai? About my poor girl, my golden girl.
Quite amazing that I was living where he had read his last poems, the last translation he had made, plus the last public reading, because as all of you know, he passed away the next summer in July 1993 in Chicago. So I was not able to meet him, but my first experience in India intersected with his last experience in India, so it's again quite magical.
Of course, he could have done a lot more. It is not that he was not recognized or not, in his lifetime, he was greatly recognized. People admired him. So it's not like people started recognizing him after his death. That's not the case. So
He would hoard his Kannada-ness and use it a little bit at a time all year long. Yeah.
I think when he was writing in Kannada and when he was in the US, obviously he was thinking about the readers here. And it seems it is recorded somewhere, I can't recollect where, that he had said that if I could do the kind of research that I am doing in Chicago or in the US, I would not have left Karnataka. Would have loved to live in Karnataka, live in India.
But in America, Raman was an Indian. I guess maybe because also those days we didn't really make these distinctions. We were still in the idea of a homogeneous culture, a singular nation state, all like that. And then also because he taught about so many things other than Kannada. But it's also true that, by about 87 or so, 86, 87, he had really left classical Tamil behind. He was really, really interested in Kannada folk tales, and in 88 or so, 87, 88, he was really chasing down Tulu stories, which he was working on with Manu Shetty, and that's one of the projects that never got finished. Just to go back to what we were saying earlier about Ramanujan really being among the first people to recognize and acknowledge that there are multiple literatures, even within Kannada. You can't say there's Kannada literature. There are many literatures within. He was one of the first people to translate Devanur Mahadev. So in 86, Ramanujan is already picking out non-mainstream. Of course, there was Nisimizikal and Nirmal Verma, but there was also Devanur Mahadev. Now that's huge, yeah?
He always thought that he is a student of Tamil literature, student of folklore, student of, that he was very, very humble in that sense. Because see, in his conversations, many times I have gone for walks with him. He would come, 2-3 months every year during summer. And all the time the conversation was about literature, about translation, about something that he has read or something that I have read. So he would ask, always it was about something not on the self, not about the self, not about gossip or not this or that. And it was always about something. So it was very interesting to have these conversations with him. And he never thought, because he was always willing to listen. I guess that if you are not willing to listen, you can't collect so many folk tales. You should be a great listener to be able to collect so many stories. So obviously he was a great listener. He had collected hundreds and hundreds. Of course, only a few appear in his books. But the kind of work that he has done in bringing this to fore is tremendous, because it gave a certain kind of dignity to collecting, collating, interpreting folk tales from India. The kind of intellectual touch that he provided in selecting and presenting these things was very unique, and it is very unique to Ramanujan. One of the first books of Ramanujan that I have is called Gadegalu, which is Proverbs. That book was brought out by Karnataka University, and there was a series, it was called 25 Paisa series, and I still have that small book. So Ramanujan was always interested in this kind of work. So when he was here, it was not something by the side. He came to collect, and these things take, they are not done overnight. The folktales from India, it is an effort of probably, I don't know, maybe a decade or more. It's not just about collecting. It's collecting, you have to see there are various versions of it, which versions to put, and also there is a selection involved. And recording it, transcripting it, enormous effort. It generated a lot of interest in non-Kannada speaking readers. And these were made accessible through translations. The insights of so many Ramayanas, And the way he describes them and the way so all that comes from his field experience. So, which is why I said, while there is a lot of effort that has gone in collecting folk stories, collecting folk songs and this and that, but Ramanujan gave it a different intellectual touch to it. He saw it with a different set of eyes, I must say. He had great talent in juxtaposing certain things. He could connect things, he could connect disparate things. And as a result, his observations were very, very interesting.
I think if Ramanujan had not been at the University of Chicago, in that time, his translations reached the world because he was in America. Even before the books had been published, we were already studying him. We were studying what he was going to publish, And it wasn't just us at the University of Chicago where we had the great good fortune of being his students, but he was lecturing everywhere. And, people would come. When he went to Wisconsin every year. There is a big South Asia conference in Wisconsin, probably one of the best in the country. It's a smaller conference and it's very focused on South Asia stuff. And it was like, other lectures or panels would be kind of, yeah, all right, we're there. We might as well go and listen to what Arshia is saying or what Lekha is saying or whatever it is. Ramanujan, you can't even stand. People knew he was great. People knew that they were in the presence of something exceptional when he spoke. And, there's another thing also, that Chicago was full of great people. I mean, there's Wendy Doniger, there was Chandrasekhar, the astronomer, the astrophysicist. Yeah. So one time, it was evening-ish, like 6 o'clock, springtime, something. So it was light outside. And Sanjay and I were on campus. And then suddenly Sanjay's like, oh my God, look, there's Chandrasekhar. So we just followed him for a little while. Because you could, right? Like some other great person would be Saul Bellow was somebody else who was there. I'm not sure I would follow Saul Bellow, but, you see them. Like you see them in the grocery store. There's a terrible mundaneness to their existence. So Ramanujan was also like that. So among the many great people in Chicago, he was still special. Wendy used to call him the jewel in the crown of South Asian studies. And I thought that was so beautiful because she's his colleague, of course, and a very good friend. And she was kind of herself a pretty important jewel in the crown. But she saw him as the jewel. His own colleagues knew that he was better than them somehow, however great they were. So you can't not know that about yourself, especially somebody as sensitive and attuned to the world. It would be weird if he did. Oh, he knew.
I feel any serious student of literature cannot ignore Ramanujan in Kannada, because he is a voice which clearly tells you there is a step change in the way the poets started using the language. The Adiga, then Ramanujan, then Tirumalesh, so you can see that change. And any serious student of literature cannot ignore Ramanujan. He is certainly a significant part of Kannada literature.
I think he was aware that he was great, but it didn't make him arrogant, and it tormented him, I think. And he died so unexpectedly that so much was left incomplete. I'm very sure that he knew he had a lot to give, or a lot that he still wanted to say. I've known other scholars who stop. They're done with what they have to say or what they want to say.
I got very interested in analyzing how what had not been published, all the material that had not seen the light of day, like the Soma poems, why he discarded them, but what he was involved in those years, in the 70s. He was working on the Alvar translations at the same time as he was working on a new bulk of poems, which is never published, called Soma. Soma as the origin of, what inspires us. So that's one of the threads. So I would say, I think we owe it to him because he wanted to publish the journals. So it's kind of, I don't want to use Indian concepts like kind of your dharma or something like that. It just draws me back to him. Things draw me back to him, and I have a wonderful relationship with Krishna, his son, and I actually encouraged him because it was a way for him to come to terms with his father. That was also a very beautiful project because I had read all his journals. There was a pile of diaries which we were not given access to, researchers, because it was particularly dated by Molly Ramanujan Daniels. They were estranged at the time. They were divorced when he passed away. She was handling the material and she had put some boxes away and said they can only be opened after, I think, 25 years. So in 2017 or 18, you could access them and, you could read the other more intimate diaries. So I encouraged his son, because I had to be in touch with him to get permission for a lot of the things that I published in my first book. He said, no, I don't want to have much to do with my father's work. I haven't really looked at his material. So I could feel a little bit of regret or pain or a difficult relationship. So it was a way of coming to terms. I encouraged him to heal those wounds by reading the diaries. So we selected obviously just a few of the material, a few texts which had to do with Ramanujan as a writer and about the process of writing. So that kept me going on with Ramanujan. Now we've become friends with Krishna.
I know that the good he gave me is enormous. I got nothing bad from him. So for myself, yes, I'm ecstatically uncritical. But I can see that other people would have other positions on him. But I will be very surprised, very, very surprised if I meet anybody who says they got more bad from him than good. I mean, not because he was a saint, far from it. I can't imagine that he was. But I think just he was so inside himself and his work that he didn't do bad things. I mean, you'll never hear that Ramanujan stole somebody's idea or that he did not give somebody credit for something. He was too big for all that. No, this is the thing. Did he know he was great? Of course he knew he was great. He didn't need to steal from students.
When I was talking to a bunch of students, one of the questions that came up was whether Ramanujan has created his own marga, his own followers. Why are there no followers for Ramanujan in Kannada poetry? In school of Ramanujan, one can say, why there is no school of Ramanujan in Kannada? Obviously, the answer is that there is nobody else who has a similar experience, because it is not about using a language. It's about having that experience, life experience, and those and that sensibilities. When Ramanujan was writing, I don't think there was anyone else in Kannada, or even later on, who were serious writers, literary writers, who lived outside India and wanted to write something like him, or write poetry, or write prose. So obviously it is very difficult to follow that model unless you have that experience and sensibility. So it is sensibilities at least one can have, but the experience is very important for a writer to follow Ramanujan. So in that sense, Ramanujan is absolutely unique.
Once those ideas are in the world, you would be very, very tone deaf and stupid to ignore them. But I will also say this, as with other even contemporary writers and thinkers and all like that, yes, we acknowledge that they are upper caste, that they're male, that they're patriarchal, or that they are upper caste and female and, have privileges that so many other women don't. Whatever it is, that we recognize the markers that define other people. But that should remind us also to recognize the markers that define us. We can't go around saying, oh, well, I'm not privileged. Yes, you are. Or whatever the equivalence of that is. So I think while it's very important to recognize these things about Ramanujan and to acknowledge that perhaps they limit him in some way, but it doesn't destroy his work. It does not destroy the importance of what he did. And that, again, I think it's not always that people who speak from such privilege or people who represent such privilege are able to open up worlds of not privilege. Ramanujan does that. I think it's okay to say thanks. you know? There's another problem also, and I will say this without naming names, but there are names to be named. I will not do that here. Many of Raman's critics, right? People who criticize, of course, this person, that he's a Brahmin and all, okay, what to do? I mean, you're born what you're born. They criticize this person. They criticize the kind of intellect that he has. I don't know about that. They're very, very critical of his translations, particularly of the vachanas, right? And then these same people who are so critical of him, they offer their translations, which are de-Brahmanized, de-patriarchalized, de-something, and they're shit, man. I mean, they're really bad translations, right? So that teaches me two things, that if you're leading with politics, you're going to create bad art, right? And the other thing is that I think it's true that people like Ramanujan and scholars of his generation and writers of his generation, and even, people like myself when I was in my 20s and my whole generation, we were not forced to be self-aware, right? I'm very glad that we have been forced to be self-aware. I do think it's also changed our work. So, but Ramanujan wrote with all kinds of awareness, including of his privilege and of his Brahminness and the fact that he was the hyphen in Indian American. And, he was... So there's another one of his great qualities. He's not simply neurotically self-reflexive. There is also a point where there is awareness which does not have to change into reflexivity. I think that's why also I get a bit irritable with this critique. Oh, he was a Brahmin. Yeah, he was a Brahmin. What to do? But he used his privilege, to really open up spaces for other people to live in, not just to be intellectual ideas and for people to actually live in. So, yeah. The power of his subjectivity, that's what came first, always. And that's why his poems and his scholarship and his translations can make you feel that this is him and that is you. He really led with his subjectivity. I don't think anybody could do that anymore, because you would say, oh, you're a male, oh, you're so self-absorbed, oh, you're patriarchal, oh, you're a Brahmin. That whole constellation of privilege would stand in the way of our admiration for him. I'm really glad I don't have to deal with all that, because I can fully, in good conscience, love him for that extreme subjectivity, to really enjoy what he is enjoying. Not in the same way necessarily, but yeah. But the funniest story about Ramanujan, it's a very American story, so I hope it translates. So the department people, it was a small department. There was active 5 or 7 professors, but there were all these ladies who ran the show, typically. All the secretaries, all the coordinators were all women. And as it happened, they were all very large, very imposing women. So you couldn't say no to them. So they decided that they were going to take everybody to a baseball game, to the Cubs in Chicago. And Cubs were a sort of losing team, but they had a very beautiful stadium, Wrigley Field. The Cubs were going through a good stage or something. They said, come on, everybody's going to go to watch the baseball game. And the department goes to watch the baseball game, and on Monday we come out, how are the baseball game? And all the women who worked, we used to call them the Bhudevis, right? Because they were, and Bhudevis were cackling and giggling, and it's so what? So I don't know if you know this, but at the top of the 7th innings in a baseball game, they sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game, right? And in Chicago, the guy who used to lead this thing for the Cubs was a guy called Harry Carey, a very famous commentator, not like that.
On 2, on 3, take me out to the...
So of course, everybody sings and all that. So Ramanujan, how did you enjoy the game? He said, yes, I did. They said, well, what was your favorite part? He said, I really liked when everybody sang that song. And it's oh, okay. I didn't know that they sing at baseball games. Oh, okay. And then he says, but it wasn't the national anthem, was it? It's like, okay, Ramanujan, you're really living in a bubble. Yeah, he's only been in America 25 years by that point. So, yeah. I mean, okay, the ball game is the ball game, but like a child, what he's enjoying is, that everybody's singing. It's like a happy birthday party or something like that. Yeah. He had this grey suit that he would wear like all year long, whether it was cold or not. I never saw him in anything but a suit and a tie, of course. And in the wintertime, he had this, he had those furry Russian hats. And he would start wearing it really early. Like it's not even winter, but come November, Ramanujan got his hat on, and then he would wear it long after the winter had left as well. And it made his big head even bigger. Yeah. He's always seemed so vulnerable. Whoever you were, you wanted to protect him. Because he was little. He was very small. Yeah, and he spoke so softly. And he seemed so fragile that you really just always wanted to say, it's okay, I won't bother you. Or, it's okay, I'll walk you home. We used to have a seminar with him on Wednesday nights, right? And this was one of the very wonderful things that many graduate programs in the US have. But you get, after you're like a little bit advanced in the program, one of your classes each semester is a high-level seminar where you have a great teacher. And I mean, it's supposed to have a topic, it's supposed to have a subject, but it's 3 hours, man. And it's, smallish classes, 6, 8 of us, 9 maybe. Of course, you're talking about literature and you're talking about translation and whatever it is. And then there's a bar called Jimmy's. Every University of Chicago student has lived 100 lives, died 100 deaths, loved 1,000 people in that bar, eaten too many burgers, drunk too much beer. But we'd go straight from class to the bar. And, bar on a Wednesday night, 9:30, 10, noisy, man. Everybody, they would just rush to try and sit next to him, right? I just get so irritated. It's like, what is this? I'm not going to be like that, right? So like a donkey, I would pretend to be cool, right, and not care, and I'd sit at the other end of the table, and I'd miss all his great wisdoms, right? But I remember one thing. So Raman would come to India every year. He would travel in India every year. He'd come to Bangalore, obviously, because he had his friends here. Girish, of course, was his great, great intellectual buddy. Vasudev, Shanbag, Pratibha Nand Kumar, lots of people. And he would go to Koshi's and all like that. And I know he was talking to me. I was sitting across from him. And every time he would come back from India, right, and you'd be so surprised. Do you know that now in India, people drink bottled water? And I was like, yeah, Raman, they do. He said, this is that thing about wonder. There was something very childlike about him. And he said, I'm also drinking bottled water. I'm an Indian and I am drinking bottled water. Look at that. I think he was again like kind of sad that he had gone so far from his roots or something, that he was like white people drinking bottled water, that he didn't have enough immunities, built up in his system. One of my favorite memories of Ramanujan is that in 1986, I think it was, in the spring of 1986, he had organized, hard to imagine Ramanujan organizing anything, but he had made possible this big Literatures of India conference at Chicago, right? So there were, Girish came and Nirmal Verma and Nissim Ezekiel and, of course, the Americans, Jack Hawley and Ananthamurthy, of course. And it was 4 or 5 days of just conversations and panels and seminar stuff. And because I said, I'm going to work, I'm going to volunteer. So I was there all the time, right? Because you'd been working so hard all day, whatever's happening at night, they'd say, oh, you should come too. So I was like complete groupie. But it was fantastic because Jayanta Mahapatra was there, people that you couldn't get to see in India, right? And I was 25, 26, and I was just like stars in my eyes. And one of the evenings, there was Ramanujan, there was Girish, and there was Ananthamurthy. And so they had this very, very open, easy conversation about Samskara, the movie, which at the time was, it was the mid-80s, so the movie was only 15 years old. And I can't remember if they screened the film or not. I think they might have. But anyway, I don't remember seeing the film there so much as just remembering this moment afterwards, and we were not in the big hall, we were in our small seminar hall, and there was a little podium, and one by one, Ananthamurthy said something, then Girish said something, then Ramanujan said something, and then they were all like talking at the same time, and they were talking over each other, and they were speaking in English and in Kannada, and then there was this moment where Girish was in the middle, and Raman on one side and Ananthamurthy on the other, and Girish, of course, this is 1985, 86, he is the movie star, right? And he puts his arms around these two guys like this, right? And they are laughing. They are just laughing like little boys. And I was like, oh my God, to have seen this moment, to have just been present. And it's the first and only time I've seen Ramanujan laugh like that. With just... He just kind of burst out of himself, and I believe there's a picture of this. Of course, I don't have it, but there must be. And I remember feeling like, this is never going to happen again. These three guys like this. At the time, we didn't realize how important it was, because this understanding that he changed the field, that he changed the content of what Indian studies is, the way you see things, that realization, that understanding came after he died, really, in the mid-90s. And, I think it was really in the early 2000s, in the very early 21st century, that other people that, non-South Asia people, I don't mean Latvians and Croatians, but I mean the people who didn't study the humanities or people who didn't study literature, even within India and in a larger academy, they all became aware that this guy was actually talking about more than what he was talking about. And what he says about literature, about how to study a text, can be applied, also how to study a culture, because it's never about what you study, it's always about how you study it and what you say. And I think that is really... I don't know what the impetus or the trigger for that was, but certainly, maybe it was the first brouhaha about 300 Ramayanas, because 300 Ramayanas is like a whipping boy, it keeps coming back. So I think maybe the first time when it came up, which was also sort of in the back end of rising Hindutva, people who were interested in the rise of Hindutva decided, okay, let's read this essay. And they're like, oh my God, this is actually an extremely brilliant person. So then they started to look at other stuff that he had done. I think another person who in India had a lot to do with Ramanujan's increasing fame and attention was Girish, because he couldn't open his mouth without saying Ramanujan. I can't open my mouth without saying Girish, like that also, He mentioned him all the time, and as you know, with much respect and much admiration and so much gratitude that he would not have been who he was.
This series was conceived by Lekha Naidu with sound recording, music and post-production by Ishan Gupta and Gaurav Krishna. We would like to acknowledge the generous contributions of Ashia Sattar, Guillermo Rodriguez, Karuna Sagari V, S.G. Basudev and Vivek Shanbag. This is your host, Madhurya Balan, signing off.